At the end of the 2022 Formula One season, and even before the 2023 Formula One season had got underway, everybody in Formula One up and down the pit lane expected one team above all others to be the quickest on the grid. Even rival teams believed that Ferrari were going to be the team to beat. It didn't exactly turn out that way though, did it? Red Bull have ruled the roost since the opening race in Bahrain and at times have looked almost unbeatable. Ferrari are fighting with Aston Martins. Sounds good for the viewers, and it certainly is, but Ferrari need to do something to fight back. What have they got in their locker? Well, to understand that, we first need to take a little bit of a look at the detailed design of the Ferrari SF23. And it's very much based on last year's car concept. The Ferrari F175 was a pretty radical design in 2022, but it worked really well. No other team really took that direction, with the vague exception of Haas, because, well, they always do what Ferrari do pretty much anyway, just in a slightly different form. The Ferrari F175 had so many interesting details, and it worked particularly well in low speed corners, medium speed corners, and under acceleration. It had fantastic traction. It did though lose out to the Honda powered cars at the very top speeds, and that's something Ferrari needed to go away and work on. And we'll revisit that in a moment. But first, I want to take a look at the front end of the SF23, because there's something that we keep on drawing attention to but can't not. It's these little sections across the leading edge of the, or the upper edge of the front wing, these slot gap separators. Now these are something that have really caught the attention. It's not a Ferrari innovation, of course, it's a Mercedes innovation, which you can see quite clearly over here. Now these parts here make it really an interesting effect. Ferrari are trying to get a little bit of an outwashing effect from the front wing, and that's something the FIA wanted the teams to move away from. I actually thought this sort of solution had been banned after the FIA adjusted some of the regulations in the rules, but actually that adjustment in the rules coming into the 2023 season made these absolutely certainly legal without really any dispute whatsoever. So for me, the big question is, why is no other team using these parts? Mercedes invented them, but they haven't seen them on their front wing since Mexico. Ferrari, though, they seem to be sticking with them quite rigidly. The front end of the Ferrari is also interesting for another reason. It's to do with the front suspension. Ferrari have gone very much their own way. You can see it here. They've gone for a pushrod actuated front suspension solution. This is pretty conventional in a modern Formula One car design, but it's notably the complete opposite to what Red Bull have done with their car concept. And at the rear of the car, and I absolutely love this about the current Formula One regulations, you can see it's the complete opposite for Ferrari. They've gone for a pull rod rear suspension layout, whereas Red Bull went for a push rod. So it's almost like opposites day in terms of the overall car design, which is why you can't really compare the Ferrari directly to the Red Bull in terms of overall design similarities, because they are so fundamentally different. But the Ferrari is an interesting car for other reasons, because Ferrari have introduced a really interesting concept to the rear of the car, and this is what made the F175 so interesting. It's that really distinctive side pod shape. You can see it here, it's very dished on the F175. Well, for the 2023 car, Ferrari looked at this. They decided, yeah, the overall intention of reducing aerodynamic drag on the back of the car, that worked really well. And they reintroduced the concept for this year's car, albeit with a slight different shape and perhaps a little tamer around this section at the rear. But this shape is a shape that every team up and down the pit lane has paid real attention to. And many teams, including Mercedes, including Aston Martin, have copied this shape, particularly around the back. So this is why the F175, the 2022 Ferrari, is such an important car. I think it's probably the most important car of last season, even though it didn't win the Constructors' Championship. Ferrari have made obviously a few changes underneath the bodywork. You can see that from the repositioned cooling louvres on the 2023 car. Just an adjustment, probably to help the airflow underneath the body. But you can see there's a bit more cooling on that bodywork. And that points to another key factor of the Ferrari design for 2023. And that's something hinted at just so slightly when you look at the car from head on. You can see the airbox, this A section here. Now that's where the combustion air and a bit of cooling air goes into the V6 combustion engine. Now, that charge air, as it's quite often called, is really, really important because getting it right gives you all the power you need. Getting it wrong, you're going to end up with reliability issues as well as being down on power. Well, in 2022, Ferrari did have absolutely enormous power unit issues. I think pretty much every race you expected a Ferrari to be smoking on the side of the track or perhaps even on fire, as we saw in Austria. The internal combustion became quite external far too often. However, Ferrari actually almost did this on purpose. It's absolutely fascinating because there was an engine freeze enforced on all F1 engine and power unit manufacturers last season. Teams and power unit manufacturers were not allowed to make any changes to the design of the power unit at any point after that freeze. Well, Ferrari looked at this and decided, well, hang on, there is a loophole in these regulations. You are allowed to make changes for reasons of reliability. So Ferrari, and they've admitted this, set out to build the strongest power unit they possibly could and didn't worry too much about reliability because they knew that if they kept on blowing them up, they could make fixes to that power unit. So coming into the 2023 season, we all expected to see Ferrari being super strong in the opening races and their power unit not only being full of power because those reliability upgrades will bring more performance, but that wasn't what happened. Ferrari's power unit has actually shown to be a little bit more fragile than anybody expected. We've already seen a Ferrari grid penalty for using too many power unit components. So that's something Ferrari are going to have to live with all season. And I expect you're going to see quite a few more of the Ferrari powered cars taking grid penalties. But that could also result in there being more performance to come for the Ferrari power unit. Something Honda can also do for Red Bull because they too have had power unit issues, albeit mostly for AlphaTauri and not so much for Red Bull, though we did have a few wobbles at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, if you remember, for Max Verstappen, though that I think was more transmission related than power unit related. So Ferrari's big push, it could come from that V6 power unit in the back of the car. But there's more changes to come because Ferrari haven't really developed the car since the season got underway, and a few people have suggested and asked me, why have Ferrari not brought massive upgrades? Red Bull is fastest, they've got the smallest amount of wind tunnel time, Ferrari has the second smallest amount of wind tunnel time incidentally, but they haven't really been developing the car over in Maranello. Well, I think that's more down to the tracks that we've been at. In reality, we've only had one serious standard conventional Formula One circuit, Bahrain, first race of the season. And even that is a slightly odd circuit because the abrasion of the surface is so high. And Ferrari really struggled to keep its tyres alive, and it really exposed that trait of the car. So the team need to go and work on that. But since then, we've had a collection of temporary circuits, and street-ish circuits, if you consider Miami, which is, I guess, more of a parking lot circuit, which has been resurfaced and permanently built, sort of, but you'll be parking on it when the Dolphins play at home. I'm not quite sure how you classify that one. But Ferrari decided finally to start bringing some new parts to the car, and you can see that on the floor of the car. This is the old specification floor of the SF23, Carlos Sainz's car from a little bit earlier in the season, and you can't really see some really big changes when you compare it to when you look at the new specification floor, because the changes are ever so subtle. And the reason for this is, when you see these changes just around here and just around here, really just slight changes to the outer lips, well, that's because all of the interesting stuff is completely invisible. It's all underneath the floor, and we're not going to get a good look at it unless one of the drivers makes a terrible mistake out on track. So Ferrari's big upgrade, it's under the floor, you can't see it. But there's more to come on this car. I think Ferrari have just kept their powder dry and waited till the season gets back going in Europe before they bring all of the new shiny bits and pieces. So you should see an enormous step forward from Ferrari. But that doesn't mean it's going to come in one of the races that's closest to their factory in Imola, because Imola is in itself a very odd circuit. Lots of chicanes, high curbs, not a good place to bring upgrades, though some teams like Mercedes are certainly going to be doing that. So Ferrari, again, we might see a few more struggles for the car to come in the next couple of races before we get to Barcelona, where I'm expecting to see a complete transformation for the SF23. But that's not to say they haven't been trying things. Ferrari clearly came into the season with ideas about reducing drag. One of the big weaknesses of the SF23, and particularly F175 last year, is what it was losing out on that top speed to the Red Bulls, and they had to do a lot of work on the car to get away from it. And that was the real reason for this distinctive soap dish shaped side pod. This was found by some people who actually posted the stuff on an internet forum with CFD, that this is a drag reducing shape. And that's really important because that increases the top speed. Without this very interesting shape, you're not going to be able to get that top speed up. So that was really important for Ferrari. For this year's car, they changed the side pod slightly. We've seen this clip before when we were looking at the floor. They've made the undercut on the side pod a little bit more aggressive. And this is a little bit more of an indication of the difference of this year's car, because in 2022, the floor basically came down in a straight line to the edge there. Now they've undercut it because they're looking to get a bit more Red Bull-like with their performance. And indeed, in the opening races of the year, Ferrari had a straight line speed advantage over Red Bull. And everybody thought, oh, the tables have turned, until we arrived in Baku. And Red Bull really unleashed the full set of bulls, or horses, that Honda V6 can spit out. And Ferrari had no answer on top speed once again, but they have sacrificed some of their mid and low speed cornering advantage over Red Bull to try and catch up with them on the straights. And you can see some of that when you look at the rear wings. Ferrari's been playing around with a single pylon rear wing, as well as a twin pylon, which we'll take a look at in a moment. But the difficulty with a single pylon rear wing, because I don't think we talk about this enough, is how you get the support of the wing, which goes straight onto the top of the gearbox, around the exhaust pipe, which has to sit in the centre of the car. And it goes through this Y-shaped section here. These were nicknamed Wylons by the team that invented them, the Manor Grand Prix team, and they don't exist anymore. It used to be called Marussia for a while as well. That team invented this solution for a Ferrari-powered car. Other teams in the past used to take this central support right through the middle of the exhaust, which was quite an interesting solution. Very difficult to do, and nobody does it anymore. The more conventional way around this is to use two pylons onto the rear wing. This is a better solution in terms of the structural strength of the wing, but then you have to run a DRS actuator at a right angle from the wing support into the centre of the wing where the DRS adjuster actually is. And it gets around the exhaust, of course, but it also creates more aerodynamic drag. So what Ferrari have been doing is experimenting with this slightly weaker but lower drag solution with a single pylon in the rear, and the slightly stronger but more draggy but better for a high downforce wing twin pylon support. And I think you're going to see the two solutions coming and going depending on the circuit demands all season long. But ultimately, what can Ferrari do to fight back? Well, I think that a lot of that work for Ferrari's fight back has already been done. They're just waiting to get to a circuit where they can bring that performance and understand it reliably. If they don't have that extra work to come, with the cost cap, with the aerodynamic testing restrictions, they are in real trouble. But I'm optimistic for the Scarlet Colossus. I think Ferrari are going to fight back. We've just not quite seen it yet.